a wealthy, cold-hearted high school girl always using her power to dominate the school, believing that no one could stand up to her. But when she chooses the wrong target, a seemingly weak black girl who has just transferred, everything changes. The bully doesn't know that the victim's father is the most powerful sheriff in town. What will happen when cruelty faces true justice? Let's explore this dramatic story. Jasmine Carter sat quietly by the car window, her gaze distant as she watched the unfamiliar scenes outside, feeling a bit of tension mixed with unease. "Jasmine, everything will be fine, sweetheart." Her father's deep voice, Marcus Carter, broke the silence in the car. Jasmine turned her head, forcing a faint smile. "I know, Dad. It's just, I've transferred so many times. I'm tired of constantly having to adjust." Marcus gently held his daughter's hand, his stern sheriff's face softening with warmth. "I know you've had to endure a lot, but I promise this will be the last time. Summit Ridge will be where we settle." Jasmine nodded quietly, though her heart still raced with nervousness as the car slowly stopped in front of Summit Ridge High. Before her stood the towering school, like an old fortress, the massive red brick building standing out against the surrounding landscape. A line of students flowed through the gates, small groups chatting happily, laughter echoing. Just a glance, and Jasmine could feel a world already defined, where each student had their place, and newcomers like her were always outsiders. She stepped out of the car, adjusted her backpack, and looked around. The nearby students immediately turned their gaze toward her, their eyes filled with curiosity mixed with a hint of coldness. Jasmine could feel the chill of those stares. A few blonde girls stood in a group near the school gate, whispering something to each other while glancing at Jasmine and snickering. She quickly lowered her head, hurried through the gate, her heart pounding in her chest. Inside the school, the hallway was lined with lockers, their faded light blue paint showing signs of age. The sound of hurried footsteps from other students mixed with conversations and laughter. But Jasmine still felt a deep loneliness amidst the crowd. As she passed by, the whispers abruptly stopped, replaced by prying eyes. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. "Stay calm, Jasmine. You've been through this before," she told herself, forcing herself not to show any weakness. But when Jasmine reached the locker assigned to her, she immediately understood that she wasn't just any new student. A small, crumpled piece of paper fell out as she opened the locker. Her hand trembled slightly as she picked it up. It was just a short, scrawled message. "This school isn't for people like you." She looked around, but no one seemed suspicious or interested. Jasmine crumpled the paper in her hand, her heart heavy. She knew exactly what was coming. Long days of tension, cold stares, and cruel whispers. All of that awaited her, and Jasmine wondered if she was strong enough to make it through again. The bell for class rang loudly, echoing down the hallway. Jasmine quickly shut her locker and hurried to her first class, her mind weighed down with worry. What she didn't know was that the person who wrote the note was standing at the far end of the hallway, watching her closely. A blonde girl with sharp eyes and a challenge-filled smile silently observed Jasmine with a malicious enjoyment. That girl was Haley Brooks, the most powerful student at Summit Ridge High, and would become the nightmare Jasmine would never forget. From the dim corner of the hallway, Haley Brooks watched Jasmine hurry toward class, her lips curling into a cold, sharp smile, like a blade just drawn from its sheath. Just by the way Jasmine lowered her head, her shoulders stiff with anxiety, Haley knew that this new girl would become her next intriguing toy. Haley Brooks wasn't just famous at Summit Ridge for her beauty, perfect porcelain skin, and golden hair that shimmered like summer sunlight. She was also known for the absolute power she had skillfully built since her first day at a high school. The only daughter of the prestigious Brooks family, Haley always wore the most expensive designer clothes, admired and adored by many students, while also making others wary, keeping their distance to avoid becoming her next target. But what Haley craved more than all those material things was control, an invisible strength always reinforced by making others fear her. And right now, Jasmine Carter's fearful eyes were like an alluring challenge to her. A newcomer, clearly different, was the perfect target for Haley to once again assert her power. Jasmine's first day at Summit Ridge quickly turned into a series of tense, lonely hours. When the teacher introduced her to the class, she tried to smile gently, but all she received was indifference mixed with cold stares. Jasmine sat at the last desk near the window, feeling as if dozens of invisible eyes were watching her every move. Her hair looks just like a tangled mess of wires. A quiet yet clear voice came from behind Jasmine, loud enough for the entire class to hear, followed by a burst of snickering. She turned around, her heart skipping a beat when she met Haley Brooks's icy gaze. Haley sat at the back of the class, reclining in her chair with an air of royalty, as though surrounded by subjects bowing in submission. Jasmine quickly turned away, swallowing the rising anger and hurt in her throat. She realized that this was no casual comment. This was a declaration of war. In the following days, things became even clearer. Haley never missed an opportunity to openly mock Jasmine, and what was worse, she never did it alone. She always had a loyal group of friends ready to join in whenever Haley spoke, making her words even sharper and more hurtful. She must think this is a Halloween party all year round. Haley loudly mocked Jasmine on a Friday morning, pointing at Jasmine's dark hoodie and worn jeans, ensuring that dozens of people nearby could hear her clearly. Laughter erupted around her, and Jasmine felt her heart constrict. Whenever Jasmine spoke in class, Haley would whisper to her friends, deliberately mimicking Jasmine's distinctive voice in a mocking tone. Gradually, Jasmine stopped speaking altogether. She shrank into herself, quietly sitting at the back of the class, never daring to look up or engage in any conversation. The isolation grew more pronounced, and Jasmine felt like an invisible ghost wandering through crowded hallways, excluded from every conversation, every friendly glance, as if others feared becoming her next target. One weekend afternoon, in the girls' bathroom, Jasmine stood washing her hands under the freezing cold water, trying to scrub away the feelings of shame and loneliness. Suddenly, the door swung open, and Haley's familiar reflection appeared in the large mirror. "Why did you transfer here?" Haley asked with a voice that was both sweet and full of malice, her arms crossed in front of her chest as she leaned against the wall behind her with a commanding presence. "Didn't anyone tell you that Summit Ridge isn't for people like you?" Jasmine turned around, trying to stay calm, but her voice trembled slightly from anger and helplessness. "I don't want any trouble with you. Can we just leave each other alone?" Haley tilted her head, a slight smile on her lips, but her eyes gleamed with a dangerous glint. "No, Jasmine, I'm the one who decides who gets to be left alone and who doesn't, and, unfortunately for you, I've already made my decision." With that, Haley walked out, the sound of her high heels clicking steadily like a clear warning echoing through the empty hallway. Jasmine stood frozen in the empty bathroom, staring at her reflection in the mirror. She watched her face blur, consumed by the overwhelming despair slowly taking over. This time, she understood. This was no ordinary challenge anymore. The real battle had just begun. The powerful footsteps of Haley faded behind the restroom door, but Jasmine stood still, gazing at her reflection in the mirror. The bell signaling the end of class rang outside, pulling her back to reality. Jasmine took a deep breath, her trembling hand wiping away the tears that were just about to fall. She knew she couldn't let Haley win so easily, But things weren't as simple as Jasmine tried to convince herself. The following days grew increasingly heavy and tense. Every class, every time she stepped into a room, it felt as if she were walking into a courtroom where every stare was an accusation, and the silence was full of hostility. Haley had succeeded in making her the target of everyone's disdain. The English class with Mr. Anderson on Tuesday mornings was usually the time Jasmine looked forward to the most, because she loved literature, and those brief moments of immersing herself in books helped her forget the harsh reality outside. But today, even that familiar room didn't bring her comfort anymore. "Jasmine," Mr. Anderson's voice broke the silence in the classroom. "Could you share your thoughts on the character of Elizabeth in Pride and Prejudice?" Jasmine flinched, trying to stay calm, and started speaking, her voice soft yet clear. As soon as she finished, a snicker echoed from the back of the class, quickly spreading. Haley, sitting behind her, crossed her arms and squinted, a mocking smile on her face. "That's interesting, Jasmine. It's just that no one could really hear what you were saying. Maybe you should try enunciating again?" The entire class burst into louder laughter. Jasmine felt her cheeks burn, and her chest tightened as though an invisible hand were squeezing her heart. Mr. Anderson frowned, but before he could intervene, Haley leaned back in her chair and sweetly smiled. "Oh, I'm just kidding, sir." Jasmine probably didn't notice, right, Jasmine? Jasmine lowered her head in silence, biting her lip until it hurt, swallowing her words of protest deep within. Mr. Anderson sighed and continued the lesson, but Jasmine couldn't hear anything anymore. Her mind echoed with Haley's cruel laughter, slicing through her self-respect like a knife. Just when Jasmine thought it would stop there, a small piece of paper was thrown onto her desk from behind. Jasmine hesitated before unrolling the crumpled paper, and immediately she wished she hadn't. Just a few sharp words were written in cold black ink. "Go back to your place." Jasmine froze, the words dancing before her eyes, seeping deep into her mind. She looked up and met Haley's cold stare, the mocking smile never fading. Haley was savoring every moment of power, relishing the pain she was causing. Jasmine's hand trembled lightly, but she refused to let the tears fall, at least not now. Slowly, she folded the paper and tucked it into her jacket pocket, reminding herself to stay calm. Jasmine knew that if she cried or reacted now, Haley would have achieved exactly what she wanted: to see Jasmine crumble in front of the whole class. The bell rang, signaling the end of class. Jasmine hurriedly packed her things, keeping her head down, rushing out of the room, but not fast enough to escape the cruel whispers that pierced her heart from behind. Poor thing, doesn't she know where she is? Why doesn't she go back to her old school? It probably suits her better there. Jasmine tried to walk faster, but those words rose like waves, drowning her in a feeling of loneliness that she couldn't escape. She clenched her fist, took a deep breath, trying to hold back the bitter tears threatening to spill from her eyes. In the crowded hallway, Jasmine still felt utterly lost and alone. She knew this was just the beginning. The poisonous whispers today were only a prelude to worse things to come. Haley Brooks didn't just want to hurt her. She wanted to break Jasmine completely. And Jasmine feared that this time, she might not be strong enough to stand tall anymore. The malicious whispers were like cold winds, trailing Jasmine all the way to the school's cafeteria. She tried to force herself not to care, keeping her steps steady, her head lowered, as if to avoid all the prying eyes behind her. Jasmine knew lunchtime had never been easy, but today the tension seemed to have reached its peak. The cafeteria buzzed with its usual noise, laughter, clattering trays, voices echoing across the large space. Jasmine carefully selected the simplest meal she could find, avoiding the scrutinizing gazes of the students around her, and quickly made her way to an empty table in the corner. But as soon as she sat down, an uneasy feeling flooded her heart, and her pulse quickened. In the distance, Haley Brooks stood with her group of close friends, her golden hair shimmering under the lights, her beautiful face always maintaining a cold, authoritative expression. Haley's sharp eyes suddenly locked onto Jasmine, and in that brief moment Jasmine felt a cold chill run down her spine. Before she could understand what was about to happen, Haley and her friends moved toward her table. "Mind if I sit here, Jasmine?" Haley's voice was sweet but laced with challenge. The students around them immediately fell silent, as though a show was unfolding before their eyes, and no one wanted to miss it. Jasmine swallowed hard, her heart pounding like a drum, but she forced herself to stay calm and responded quietly, "There's still plenty of space here, Haley." Haley tilted her head and smiled faintly, her cold gaze sweeping over Jasmine's tray of food. "I know, but I prefer this spot. Only I don't think it's the right place for someone like you." Before Jasmine could react, Haley quickly snatched the tray of food from in front of her and slammed it hard onto the floor. The loud crash reverberated through the room, plunging the cafeteria into stunned silence. All eyes turned to Jasmine, then down to the floor where food spilled out, the tray overturned, a scene of utter humiliation and disgrace. "A clumsy person like you doesn't belong here." Haley smiled sweetly, but her eyes gleamed with malicious pleasure as she watched Jasmine freeze in embarrassment and panic. Whispers quickly spread throughout the cafeteria, and with each passing second, Jasmine felt like she was dying slowly from the humiliation. She could hear the muffled laughter, the pitying yet mocking gazes closing in on her, pushing her to the edge of what she could endure. "What's going on here?" A stern voice cut through the oppressive atmosphere. Ms. Megan Riley, the assistant principal, stood nearby, staring at Haley before casting a questioning glance toward Jasmine. Haley immediately adopted a perfect, innocent face, her eyes wide, feigning naivety. "It's just a little accident, Ms. Riley." Jasmine accidentally dropped her tray. Ms. Riley frowned and scrutinized Jasmine. Jasmine swallowed the tears back down, her throat tightening. She knew she couldn't speak the truth now, as any explanation would only make things worse. In the end, she just nodded softly, her voice resigned, "Yes, ma'am, it was just an accident." A suffocating silence settled over the room. Haley's satisfaction was evident in the small, secretive smile she wore as she turned and walked away, her friends following with self-satisfied, victorious glances. Jasmine shakily stood up, bent down to pick up the tray, the sound of mocking laughter still echoing around her. She knew, deep down, that Haley had just sent a clear message, not only to her but to the entire school. Jasmine was not allowed to exist at Summit Ridge. But what Jasmine didn't realize at that moment was that today's humiliating event was just the beginning of a much fiercer battle ahead. And this time, she wouldn't be able to stay silent forever. The sound of Haley's footsteps, along with her group of friends, faded away, but the echoes of what happened in the cafeteria still lingered in Jasmine's mind, persistent like an annoying sound that couldn't be erased. Jasmine stood silently, her hands still trembling slightly as she bent down to pick up the food scraps scattered on the floor. Around her, the murmurs grew louder, seeping into her ears like the buzzing of an insect, haunting and inescapable. Just as she was about to leave the scene of humiliation, Ms. Megan Riley's sharp voice cut through the chaos in her mind. "Wait, Jasmine. You don't have to do this. I need to talk to you for a moment." Jasmine turned around, her gaze unintentionally meeting the stern, scrutinizing look of Ms. Riley. The middle-aged woman, with her short, dark brown hair, thin, metal-framed glasses that glinted with cold light, and sharp eyes that seemed to pierce through Jasmine, looked at her as if trying to see through every secret she held. Jasmine swallowed hard, realizing this wasn't just a casual invitation. She knew she was about to face an interrogation she had no desire to undergo. "Yes, ma'am," Jasmine replied softly, trying to hide the anxiety rising in her chest. Miss Riley gestured for her to step into a quieter corner near the exit of the cafeteria, away from the curious eyes of the students watching them. Jasmine followed her, her heart heavy as the whispers behind her grew clearer. It felt as if each step she took was sinking deeper into a mire of helplessness and humiliation. "Now, can you tell me exactly what happened, Jasmine?" Miss Riley asked directly, her tone cold but clear. Her eyes were sharp, making Jasmine feel as if nothing could escape her scrutiny. Jasmine looked down at her trembling hands, recalling every detail of the incident. She could still vividly remember Haley's challenging gaze, the mocking laughter of her friends, and the moment the food tray was violently thrown to the floor. She wanted to scream, to tell the whole truth, to point at Haley and accuse her in front of everyone. But those emotions quickly faded. A bitter feeling crept into her heart, reminding Jasmine of the harsh reality she had faced many times before. The school would always side with people like Haley. A rich, powerful girl from a well-known family in town would always be protected and shielded. Jasmine realized this truth like a knife slicing through her, and the pain intensified. She took a deep breath and finally shook her head gently. "It was just an accident, ma'am. I accidentally dropped my tray. Haley, she just happened to be standing near me at the time." Miss Riley frowned, her eyes searching for another confession hidden within Jasmine's words. She tilted her head, looking at Jasmine with clear suspicion. "Are you sure that's all that happened, Jasmine? I don't think everything is as simple as that." Jasmine struggled to maintain her voice, even though her throat was tight from lying to protect herself from worse consequences later. "I'm sure, ma'am, it was just a small mistake. I'm sorry for causing trouble for you and everyone." Miss Riley sighed, looking at Jasmine with a mixture of disappointment and doubt in her eyes. She stayed silent for a while before finally speaking, her voice lower but still cold. "If that's what you're saying, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. But Jasmine, you need to understand that the school does not tolerate any behavior that causes disruption or shows signs of bullying, whether you're new or not. If anything happens, I expect you to tell me the truth instead of hiding it." Jasmine swallowed, lowering her head even further to hide the bitterness in her gaze. "Yes, I understand, ma'am. I'll remember that." Ms. Riley gave Jasmine one last look, then nodded slightly, as if accepting that the matter was temporarily closed, before turning back to her desk. Jasmine stood still for a moment, feeling an invisible weight pressing on her shoulders more heavily than before. She knew she had just made a painful choice, but there was no better option at that moment. Confronting Haley directly now would be like throwing herself into a battle Jasmine wasn't strong enough to win. She turned and walked out of the cafeteria, trying to keep her steps slow and normal, as if the curious and pitying looks on her were non-existent. But deep inside her heart, Jasmine felt like she had just lost something very important: her self-respect, trust, and the courage to stand up for herself. On her way back to class, Jasmine silently wondered to herself how many more times she would have to bow her head and endure, how many more times she would have to lie and sacrifice herself for peace. But deep within her, Jasmine knew one thing for sure. This was only the first step on the long, difficult road ahead. And sooner or later she would have to choose: continue to endure or stand up and face Haley Brooks once more. This time, the choice would determine everything. But today, she had chosen silence. A painful choice, but the only one that allowed her to survive. At least for now. Throughout the drive home that afternoon, Jasmine kept her lips sealed, her eyes hazy as they drifted out the car window. But inside, a storm was raging. The images of the incident in the cafeteria replayed relentlessly in her mind, pushing her deeper into feelings of helplessness and despair. Choosing to stay silent in front of Megan Riley had left a painful, lingering wound in her heart, more enduring than anything she'd ever experienced before. The car slowly stopped in front of the familiar white house, nestled in the peaceful, tree-lined street of Summit Ridge. Jasmine silently opened the car door and stepped out, just in time to notice her father's familiar patrol car, Marcus Carter, parked in front of the garage. He had come home earlier than usual, and just by looking at the concerned expression on his face as he stood by the living room window, Jasmine knew it wouldn't be easy to hide her troubled mood this time. Marcus Carter was the calm, reserved type, but he always understood everything before anyone could even speak. As the new sheriff of Summit Ridge, Marcus was known for his integrity and sternness, but to Jasmine, he was always a gentle father who cared deeply for even the smallest changes in her expression. "Hey, sweetheart," Marcus said as Jasmine stepped inside, his voice warm as usual, but his gaze sharp with observation. Jasmine gave a small nod, avoiding his gaze, quickly taking off her shoes and rushing toward the stairs. "Wait, Jasmine?" Marcus's voice was gentle, but firm enough to stop her in her tracks. "Are you okay? You don't look happy." Jasmine stood frozen, her heart beginning to race. She knew her father was incredibly perceptive and could spot even the smallest shift in her expression. She slowly turned around, forcing a smile to ease the growing suspicion in his eyes. "I'm fine, Dad. I'm just a little tired." Marcus didn't answer right away, his eyes on her with a look of quiet concern. He walked over to her and gently placed his hand on her shoulder, as if trying to give her the strength to open up. "I'm a cop, Jasmine. And what I'm best at is knowing when someone is lying to me, especially when that someone is my daughter." Marcus's words rang softly, but Jasmine felt them pierce through the protective shell she'd built up all day. She remained silent for a long moment, feeling as if something inside her was breaking apart, and finally the tears she had been holding back since morning started to fall. "Dad," Jasmine choked out, the words difficult to form. I don't want to make you worry." Marcus gazed deep into Jasmine's tear-filled eyes, his hand squeezing her shoulder lightly, his voice both comforting and encouraging. "Tell me, Jasmine. Whatever it is, you're not facing it alone." Jasmine took a deep breath, feeling the strength to speak now, bolstered by her father's unconditional comfort. The words came out shaky, but they were sincere. "There's a girl named Haley Brooks. She doesn't like me. She's always trying to hurt me and embarrass me in front of everyone. I've tried to ignore it, tried to stay silent, but she won't stop. Today, she made me the laughingstock of the whole school." Marcus remained silent, his gaze becoming sharper and more serious as he listened to the pain in his daughter's words. Jasmine continued, her voice choked with the emotions she could no longer hold back. "I told Miss Riley it was just an accident. I didn't dare tell the truth because I know the school would side with Haley. She's the daughter of the powerful Brooks family, while I'm just the new girl, an outsider with no one to stand up for me." Jasmine's words faltered as the tears flowed freely. Marcus gently pulled her into his arms, his strong and steady embrace wrapping around her like a shield against all the hurt outside. He spoke calmly, with resolve. "Sweetheart, no one has the right to hurt you like that. No matter who they are, they will be held accountable for their actions. I won't let anyone hurt you again." "But Dad," Jasmine whispered weakly, "I'm afraid if you intervene, things will only get worse." Marcus gently lifted her chin, looking directly into her tear-streaked eyes, his voice firm but soft. "I understand your fear, Jasmine, but staying silent and enduring is not the way to get through this. You don't have to sacrifice your self-respect just to keep the peace for a while. The truth always needs to be spoken, and I will stand by you all the way." Jasmine looked at her father, the strength and determination in his eyes giving her the belief she thought she had lost. Finally, Jasmine nodded slightly, her voice still trembling but full of resolve. "I understand now, Dad. I won't stay silent anymore." Marcus hugged his daughter again, his eyes filled with the unwavering resolve of a father who would fight for his child. And in his warm embrace, Jasmine realized something clear. She no longer had to face this battle alone. And Haley Brooks, no matter how powerful she was, would now face a challenge she never expected. Because Jasmine was not just a vulnerable new girl who could be easily bullied, she was the daughter of Marcus Carter, a man who always stood for justice. The secret Jasmine had tried to hide today would become the beginning of a fierce confrontation ahead, one that could no longer be avoided. As the first light of the morning stretched across the quiet streets of Summit Ridge, Marcus Carter had already been awake for hours. He stood by the living room window, his gaze distant as he looked toward the school where his daughter was facing her difficult days. The entire night, Marcus had been unable to sleep, a burning fire smoldering in his chest, growing stronger by the minute, urging him to take action. Marcus had witnessed many injustices in his life, serious cases, criminals evading the law, but this was a different kind of pain, because the one suffering was Jasmine, his only daughter. The image of her tear-filled eyes and resigned expression from the previous evening kept replaying in his mind, making him more certain than ever that this time he had to rise up and protect her. When Jasmine walked into the kitchen for breakfast, she was surprised to find her father already dressed in his police chief uniform, his face stern with determination. "You're going to work early today?" Jasmine asked hesitantly, a strange mix of worry and hope rising within her. Marcus turned to look at her, his eyes shining with resolve. His voice was calm but firm. "Today, I'm going to school with you. This can't wait any longer. I will speak directly with Principal Warren and Haley Brooks' parents. They need to understand the consequences of what their daughter is doing." Jasmine suddenly felt a wave of anxiety. She was used to quietly enduring things, trying not to make matters worse. But today, in the face of her father's unwavering determination, she could only nod gently. After all, she had decided she wouldn't stay silent anymore. It was time for Jasmine to learn how to stand up for herself, even though it made her feel uneasy. Marcus's shiny black patrol car slowly rolled through the gates of Summit Ridge, immediately attracting curious glances from the students. Jasmine felt her heart race, but her father's steady presence beside her gave her some strength. Marcus stepped out of the car, adjusting his police chief's cap, then walked with Jasmine straight into the school office. Inside, Principal Daniel Warren, with his silver hair and sharp eyes, was waiting, accompanied by Mr. and Mrs. Bradley and Victoria Brooks. Haley's parents, Bradley, a well-known and wealthy businessman in the area, and Victoria, a woman always dressed in elegant attire with a polite yet insincere smile. As soon as Marcus entered, Bradley Brooks stood up with a calm, confident expression. "Good morning, Chief Carter. We didn't think this matter needed to get so serious. After all, kids will always have their way of fooling around." Marcus stood facing Bradley, his gaze calm but piercing. With all due respect, Mr. Brooks, I don't believe humiliating a new student in the cafeteria is just harmless fun. It's bullying, and it needs to be dealt with." Bradley raised his eyebrows slightly, attempting a polite smile, but his tone was condescending. "I think you're exaggerating the issue, Chief. We've all been teenagers, and sometimes they just can't control their emotions. Haley is a good kid. Maybe this was just a small misunderstanding." Victoria Brooks nodded in agreement, lightly patting her husband's shoulder, her voice soft, yet just as cold. "Yes, it's just kids being kids. I think Jasmine might have misunderstood a little, and maybe she's just being overly sensitive." Marcus fell silent for a moment, his gaze still sharp. When he spoke again, his voice was much firmer. "Misunderstanding. I've seen many serious cases start from what people call small misunderstandings. Bullying in schools is no joke, and the consequences it has on the victim are extremely serious." He turned to Principal Warren, his voice now clear and authoritative. "Principal Warren, I didn't come here to hear excuses or meaningless justifications. I came here to demand that the school take responsibility. It's the school's duty to protect its students, regardless of their wealth or background." Principal Warren was silent, his eyes momentarily filled with uncertainty. He glanced at Marcus, then at the Brooks, before speaking. "I understand your concerns, Chief Carter. But I think we should calm down and look into this more thoroughly." Marcus politely but firmly interrupted. "I agree, Mr. Warren. But we already have enough evidence and witnesses to show that what Haley did to my daughter was not just a harmless prank. I cannot and will not accept the school ignoring this act." Marcus turned to Haley's parents, his gaze stern, his voice resolute. "Mr. and Mrs. Brooks, you may think that your power and wealth are enough armor to protect your daughter. But I assure you, no one is above the law or human decency. If Haley continues this behavior, I will not hesitate to take every legal measure to stop her." The atmosphere in the room grew tenser than ever. Bradley and Victoria Brooks exchanged uncomfortable looks, unable to counter his words. Finally, Bradley spoke, his voice less confident than before. "We will talk to Haley. I'm sure this won't happen again." Marcus looked directly at Bradley, his tone unwavering. "I hope so, because next time, it won't be a friendly conversation like this." Marcus turned and walked out of the room, his gaze still burning with determination. Jasmine followed her father, feeling lighter than ever before. She knew her father had sent a clear message, not just to the Brooks family but to the whole school, that Jasmine was no longer alone, and her silence had ended here. As soon as Marcus stepped out of the meeting room, the hallway of Summit Ridge High immediately fell into a tense, suffocating silence. Jasmine walked beside her father, still feeling nervous, but for the first time in days, she felt a small spark of strength. Marcus Carter had sent a very clear message. He would not allow anyone to harm his daughter, no matter who they were, no matter how rich or powerful they might be. But just as Marcus was about to leave the hallway, he suddenly paused. His sharp eyes stopped on the wall where the student achievements were displayed, with the most prominent face being Haley Brooks. The confident, proud expression on Haley's face in the photo made Marcus frown slightly, a cold suspicion flashing in his mind. This wasn't just an isolated bullying incident. Something deeper and more complicated was going on at Summit Ridge, and he was determined to get to the bottom of it. Marcus turned to Jasmine, placing a hand on her shoulder gently but firmly. "Go to class, Jasmine. I need to talk to Principal Warren and Miss Riley. I won't let this slide." Jasmine looked at her father, a hint of unease in her eyes, but she nodded. Marcus turned and walked quickly back to the principal's office, every step filled with unwavering determination. Inside the office, Principal Daniel Warren and Assistant Megan Riley stood together, their expressions tense when they saw Marcus return. Neither of them seemed to expect him to come back, and it was clear from their confused looks that they weren't prepared. "Sheriff Carter, is there anything else we can help you with?" Principal Warren tried to sound polite, but his voice trembled slightly, the unease growing more apparent. Marcus closed the door behind him, and the air in the office seemed to thicken for a moment. He looked directly into Warren and Riley's eyes, his tone serious. "I'm here because there's something I need to clarify. I don't believe what happened to my daughter was just a random incident, as you both tried to explain to me." Warren furrowed his brow, trying to maintain his composure, though it was clear he was flustered. "I assure you, Sheriff, we take these matters seriously. There's no cover-up here." Marcus stared at Warren for a long moment, then turned to Assistant Principal Megan Riley, his gaze so sharp that she instinctively looked away. "Ms. Riley, you were there in the cafeteria when the incident happened, weren't you?" Megan Riley froze, hesitated for a moment before replying quietly, "Yes, I was there when it happened. But Jasmine said it was just an accident." Marcus frowned, his voice growing firmer. "And you believed her immediately, without asking any further questions? An accident right in front of so many students, and no one spoke up, and you didn't look into it any further?" Riley fumbled, her eyes showing signs of confusion. I just didn't want to make a big deal out of it at the time." Marcus cut her off sharply but clearly. "You didn't want to make a big deal, or you didn't want to challenge Haley Brooks. I believe you know, better than anyone, that this isn't the first time students at this school have been bullied, and the school has chosen to stay silent to protect powerful students like Haley." Principal Warren interjected, attempting to defuse the situation, his tone conciliatory. "Mr. Carter, we understand the seriousness of this issue, but to say we've been covering things up is a bit much." Marcus turned and looked directly at Principal Warren, his gaze so cold that Warren froze in place. Marcus's voice rang out strong and sharp. "I'm not being unreasonable, Mr. Warren. I've done a preliminary investigation and learned that over the years, several parents have complained about bullying at Summit Ridge, but every time the school has chosen to downplay the issue rather than deal with it properly. Is this school policy, or is it just fear of the power of the Brooks family?" Warren and Riley exchanged helpless glances. Marcus continued, not giving them any chance to make excuses. "I'm the new sheriff of this town, but I'm not one to turn a blind eye. If you two don't take immediate and decisive action to stop this behavior, I will personally get involved. And I guarantee you, next time it won't just be a private conversation like today." The tension in the air was almost suffocating. Principal Warren sighed, looking down at the desk, unable to face Marcus's cold, piercing stare any longer. Megan Riley stood beside him, her hands trembling slightly, her eyes wide with confusion and unease. Finally, Marcus spoke in a quieter but still firm tone. "I'm requesting an immediate internal investigation. I want to know what the school is going to do to stop this bullying. If I don't get a satisfactory answer as soon as possible, I'll personally conduct an investigation as sheriff." Marcus turned and left the office, his steps firm and strong, leaving behind the absolute silence of the two school leaders. He had just done something that no one had ever dared to do before. Expose the truth that the school had been hiding for years. Marcus knew that from now on, things would no longer be easy, but he was certain that this was the important first step in bringing justice, not just for Jasmine, but for all the students who had silently endured at Summit Ridge. The office door slammed shut behind Marcus, but the echoes of the heated conversation still hung in the air, weighing heavily on Principal Warren and Assistant Riley's minds. For a moment, both felt as though they had been stripped of their usual protective armor, exposed to the raw, painful truth Marcus had laid bare. They both realized, more clearly than ever, that this time there would be no covering up or avoiding the consequences. Meanwhile, outside in the school hallway, Haley Brooks was chatting happily with her usual group of friends. She remained as composed and proud as ever, as if nothing could shake her. But as soon as Assistant Principal Megan Riley appeared before her with a stern, pressuring expression, Haley's smile immediately faded. "Haley, you need to come with me now." Riley's voice was cold, her gaze carrying an unprecedented severity. Haley blinked in surprise, trying to keep her calm but clearly showing her irritation. "What's going on, Ms. Riley? I was talking with my friends." "This can't wait," Riley interrupted firmly. "Your parents and Principal Warren are waiting in the office. We need to talk." Haley's face paled slightly at the mention of her parents' names, but she quickly regained her fake confidence, reluctantly following Riley. Her friends stopped and exchanged confused, curious looks. This was the first time they had seen Haley called to the office in such a serious manner. When the office door opened, Haley immediately felt the unusual tension that filled the small room. Her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Bradley and Victoria Brooks, sat opposite Principal Warren with serious, anxious expressions. For the first time, she saw clear disappointment in their eyes. It made her feel uncomfortably uneasy. "Sit down, Haley," her father spoke, his voice cold and full of disappointment. Haley hesitated but sat down, trying to hide her embarrassment. She had never been accustomed to being called into the office, let alone to be scrutinized with such stern eyes from her parents and teachers. Principal Warren cleared his throat, his gaze sharp. "Haley, Jasmine Carter's father, Sheriff Marcus Carter, came to speak with us directly. He provided clear evidence that you have been systematically bullying Jasmine and intentionally humiliating her in front of the whole school. Do you have anything you'd like to explain?" Haley immediately started to deny it, but her father's icy stare made her pause. Mr. Bradley Brooks spoke, his voice low but filled with authority. "Be honest, Haley. I don't want to hear any more lies. It's already clear." Haley bit her lip, her voice weaker than ever before. I was just joking. I didn't think Jasmine would be so sensitive." Marcus, still standing nearby with a determined and stern look, immediately interjected, his voice firm and clear. "Joking? Haley, what you did was not a joke. You deliberately hurt and humiliated my daughter in front of hundreds of people. That's unacceptable, and you have to take responsibility for it." Principal Warren looked at Haley, his tone no longer carrying the usual leniency. "Haley, this isn't the first time you've caused trouble at this school. We've warned you several times, but you've always ignored us. Now you will have to apologize to Jasmine Carter in front of everyone here." Haley's eyes widened, her face flushing red with embarrassment and anger. Apologizing in front of everyone was something she had never imagined she would have to do, but the stern gaze of her parents and teachers left her no choice. For the first time in her life, she felt the heavy price of her arrogance was far more costly than she had ever thought. Finally, Haley stood up, reluctantly lowering her head, her voice almost inaudible. I'm sorry, Jasmine." Marcus shook his head, his tone more severe than ever. "I think you can speak louder and clearer than that, Haley." Haley's face turned pale with shame, and she bit her lip hard, her eyes welling with tears from anger and helplessness. But there was no way out now. She had to raise her head, the arrogance that had always been her shield completely gone for the first time, "I'm sorry, Jasmine. I was wrong for hurting you." Though Jasmine knew that Haley's apology was forced and insincere, she still felt a slight sense of relief in her heart. As Haley looked up, she saw the deep disappointment in the eyes of her parents. The two people who had always been proud of her and never imagined their daughter would end up in a situation like this. Marcus stepped forward, his cold eyes fixed firmly on Haley, his voice low but clear. "I hope you remember this moment, Haley. Your family's power and wealth will never put you above others, and they can't protect you forever from the consequences of your wrongdoings." As Marcus left the office, the atmosphere inside became thick with heavy silence. For the first time in her life, Haley Brooks felt the sting of helplessness and shame, things she had always thought she would never have to face. The price of power and arrogance turned out to be far more bitter and painful than she had ever imagined. The moment the office door opened, Haley hurriedly stepped out, her head lowered to avoid the scrutinizing stares from the increasingly crowded hallway. Her heart was racing, her face flushed with a mix of anger and deep humiliation. This was the first time in Haley Brooks' life that she had to endure the feeling of helplessness, forced to bow her head to someone she always considered beneath her. Her wounded pride, and all Haley could think of now was revenge, at any cost. The next morning, before the sun had even warmed the long hallways of Summit Ridge, Haley appeared with her usual cold and arrogant expression. But inside, a simmering rage was burning, determined to regain the power that Jasmine and her father had taken from her the day before. At lunchtime, the atmosphere in the school cafeteria was as noisy as ever. Jasmine, after everything that had happened, tried to avoid all eyes, choosing the most secluded corner to sit and eat. But as soon as she sat down, a familiar feeling made her shiver. Haley Brooks was walking straight toward her, her eyes full of hatred, but her lips still wore the cold, smug smile as usual. "Well, look who we have here," Haley said sarcastically, loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "Jasmine Carter, the special girl protected by the most powerful sheriff in town." Jasmine tried to stay calm, not responding. She knew very well that Haley was deliberately provoking her to regain some of her lost image, but her heart still tightened with nervousness. The students around them had started to fall silent, curious, waiting for something to happen. Haley leaned against the table, arms crossed in front of her chest, her condescending tone only adding to the provocation. "I'm really surprised, Jasmine. I didn't know you were weak enough to run to your daddy to have him handle things for you. I guess I overestimated your self-respect." A few giggles erupted from around them. Jasmine tried to swallow the rising feeling of shame, telling herself to stay composed in the face of Haley's blatant provocation. But Haley wasn't done. She took another step closer, her piercing gaze drilling into Jasmine like she wanted to pierce through her. "Let's be honest, Jasmine. Do you ever feel ashamed of always having to rely on others like that? I actually feel really sorry for you. I wonder how you'd even survive here without your dad." Haley's voice was laced with malice, each word like a sharp needle stabbing into Jasmine's heart, making her feel as if the whole room was closing in on her. Some students began to look at Jasmine with pity, while others were clearly enjoying the spectacle of Haley's revenge. Jasmine stayed silent, her hands clenched tightly under the table, trying to suppress the emotions that were threatening to spill over. Haley realized she had hit a nerve. A smug smile returned to her face as she leaned in even closer, her voice lowering but still sharp. "Listen, Jasmine. No matter how hard you try, no matter how powerful your dad is, you will always be an outsider, a stranger rejected by this entire town. Don't think that just because of a few forced apologies you can change your lowly position." Jasmine lifted her gaze, and for the first time, a strong spark of resistance flared within her. But she still didn't say a word. Haley stood up straight, deliberately raising her voice so everyone could hear. "You know what, Jasmine? No matter how many times your dad comes here, no matter how hard you try, you will never belong here. Summit Ridge is for people like me, not for pathetic people like you." The entire cafeteria seemed to fall into an uncomfortable silence after Haley's malicious statement. She turned and walked away, leaving Jasmine sitting there, feeling more cornered and deeply hurt than ever before. Jasmine tried to hide the tears that were threatening to fall, feeling like all the strength she had been building had just been shattered by Haley's words. From the far corner of the cafeteria, Haley watched Jasmine with satisfaction, secretly pleased to see her so hurt and bewildered. But deep inside, Haley couldn't shake the feeling of unease creeping in. Even though she had gained the upper hand in this confrontation, Haley knew she hadn't fully regained the power she had lost. Jasmine and her father, Marcus Carter, had made Haley feel seriously threatened. For the first time, she felt her absolute dominance at Summit Ridge was seriously shaken. Haley closed her eyes, trying to push away the growing anxiety. She reminded herself that she was still Haley Brooks, the one everyone admired and feared. But even those self-assurances couldn't erase the fear growing inside her. The fear that Jasmine Carter, that seemingly weak girl, might actually change everything. Haley didn't realize that her cruel act of revenge had inadvertently sparked a new strength within Jasmine, a resistance and courage Jasmine had never had before. And this would mark a turning point, not just for Jasmine, but for Haley and everyone who was watching this battle unfold at Summit Ridge. As the soft laughter faded and disappeared behind the slamming cafeteria door, Haley's presence slowly evaporated. Jasmine remained seated at the table, quietly observing the now cold tray of food before her. Her heart raced as if it wanted to leap out of her chest. Haley's venomous taunts still felt like sharp knives digging deep into her mind. But this time, Jasmine felt something different growing inside her. A fury, raw and intense, stronger than any fear or shame she had ever endured. She took a deep breath, clenching her fists to calm herself. Jasmine's gaze slowly lifted, sweeping over the curious, judgmental faces that still lingered in her direction. In those eyes, she could clearly sense pity, curiosity, and even malicious amusement. It only made her realize more that if she remained silent, if she continued to endure, she would never escape the cycle of injustice. It was time for Jasmine to speak up. Suddenly, she stood up, causing all the whispers around her to stop in an instant. Jasmine walked briskly, each step echoing across the cold cafeteria floor as she headed directly toward Haley and her group of friends standing near the door. As Jasmine approached, Haley's eyes widened in surprise but quickly turned into a look of amused mockery. "Well, look at this," Haley laughed lightly, intentionally speaking loudly so that everyone watching could hear. "Jasmine decided to come to me for help from her daddy again." A small laugh rippled from Haley's friends, but this time Jasmine did not waver. She stood tall, her gaze steady and resolute as she faced Haley, her voice clear and strong enough for the entire cafeteria to hear. "You're wrong, Haley. I don't need my dad here to face you, and I'm not the one who's afraid here. You are the one who's scared." The entire cafeteria immediately fell into a heavy silence. Haley's eyes widened, shocked by Jasmine, the girl she always thought was weak, now standing before her, openly challenging her. Haley's face shifted from mockery to anger, but she forced herself to remain calm, trying to maintain control. What did you say? I'm scared of you, Jasmine. That's ridiculous. Jasmine took another step forward, unafraid. For the first time, she realized that Haley was the one who felt unstable and uneasy, having completely lost her grip in front of the crowd. Jasmine spoke calmly, her gaze cold but filled with strength. Yes, Haley. You're scared because for the first time in your life, someone is standing up to you, holding you accountable for what you've done. You're used to making people fear you, making them bow their heads and endure, but not anymore. You've just lost your power, and that's what's making you panic. Haley gritted her teeth, her face turning bright red with anger and embarrassment. She struggled to find a way to respond, but Jasmine's words had hit the hidden weakness she always concealed. The students around them began to look at Haley differently, mixed with suspicion and scrutiny. A few even started whispering to each other, no longer fully on Haley's side. Jasmine noticed the shift. She boldly took another step forward, her voice sharper, clearer. I'm not weak for needing my dad to protect me. You're the weak one, Haley, because you rely on others' fear to create power. But now that power is shattered. You know this is true, don't you? Haley fell silent, for the first time in her life not knowing how to respond to Jasmine's sudden strength. The eyes of the students around them had completely changed. There was no longer fear or admiration for Haley. Instead, they looked at her with doubt, even pity, as if she had just lost all her power and respect. Jasmine continued, her voice no longer hesitant. All this time, you've believed you could control everything with fear. But what you never understood is that true power doesn't come from making others fear you. It comes from the courage to face the truth. And that's something you've never had. Jasmine's words echoed through the cafeteria like a powerful declaration. For the first time, the students around her looked at Jasmine with eyes of respect and genuine admiration. Haley glanced around, realizing clearly that the power and status she had always taken pride in were now completely shattered. She clenched her jaw, her eyes burning with anger and confusion, but she could not utter a single retort. Finally, Haley could only turn away and walk quickly, the feeling of defeat and loss overwhelming her. Jasmine stood still, watching Haley's retreating figure. Inside, a sense of liberation and pride swelled stronger than ever. For the first time in her life, Jasmine hadn't stayed silent. For the first time, she had stood up, strong and brave, to face her bully head-on. And more importantly, she realized that true strength didn't come from power or wealth. It came from the courage to face fear and overcome it. And from that moment on, Jasmine knew she would never go back to being the girl who remained silent. When the cafeteria door closed behind her, Haley felt like she was escaping from a nightmare. Her feet hurried down the empty hallway, her heart racing, her breath coming in short gasps as if she had just escaped a real attack. Haley had never felt this panicked before. She had always relied on her power, on her ability to control everything around her. But now, all that pride seemed to crumble. For the first time in her life, Haley felt the unmistakable sensation of fear, a foreign emotion, terrifying in its intensity. The unexpected strength and defiance of Jasmine earlier had struck her like a huge wave, breaking down the walls of arrogance Haley had spent so long building. She tried to tell herself that she was still in control, that what Jasmine had said was just a weak attempt at resistance, but deep down, a small voice whispered that this time she had truly lost. Haley stopped in front of the girls' restroom door, pushed it open, and stood still in front of the sink. Her hands trembled as she turned on the cold water, splashing her flushed face, trying to wash away the burning humiliation. The cold drops fell on her cheeks, as though trying to wash away the lingering sense of shame that still smoldered inside her. But the more she tried, the more Haley realized that what had been hurt inside her couldn't be washed away so easily. She looked up at the mirror, and for the first time in her life, Haley didn't recognize the reflection staring back at her. The girl who had always been confident, proud, now looked back at her with eyes full of confusion, worry, and insecurity. The familiar face in the mirror was slowly transforming into a stranger, someone she never thought she would become. A failure. "No," Haley whispered, struggling against the rising panic. "I can't lose. I won't let Jasmine win." But even those words of self-assurance lacked the power to extinguish the growing worry within her. Jasmine's sharp words still echoed in Haley's mind, like a clear, harsh sentence, forcing her to face a truth she had always tried to avoid. "You're the weak one, Haley. You're scared because for the first time in your life, someone stood up to you." Those words kept repeating, each one digging deep into Haley's self-esteem, making her feel as if the fake mask she had worn for so long was being peeled away, bit by bit. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the terrifying thoughts, but it was all in vain. The truth was clear. She had lost control, lost the respect of the people she had always considered her most loyal followers. The sound of footsteps from the hallway startled Haley, and she quickly wiped her wet face, trying to appear calm. The restroom door opened, and a few girls stepped inside. But as soon as they recognized Haley, they fell silent, exchanged curious glances, and quickly left, as if wanting to distance themselves from her as fast as possible. Haley could feel the shift. She was no longer the center of power she once was. Now, she was just someone pitied and scrutinized. The feeling of isolation and betrayal hit her hard, so forcefully that Haley had to lean against the wall to keep herself from collapsing. For the first time, she felt the true consequences of everything she had caused. The people who had once stood by her, who had admired her, now turned their backs when they saw her weak. The false power she had once taken pride in no longer held any value. A deep anger surged inside her, but Haley quickly realized she no longer had the strength to fight back. Her power had always relied on the fear of others, but when that fear disappeared, Haley was left with nothing. Jasmine had completely shattered that armor, exposing the weakness inside her for everyone to see. Standing silently in the empty restroom, Haley had to admit that deep inside, a fierce battle was raging, the battle in her mind. A part of her still wanted to believe she could regain control, but the larger part, much stronger, was forcing her to accept defeat. That bitter truth made her feel lost, unsure of what to do next. Bitter tears finally streamed down Haley's cheeks, mixing with the cold water still flowing from the faucet. She felt as if her entire world had collapsed. Everything she had trusted and relied on shattered into pieces. But above all, what scared her the most at that moment was the image of Jasmine standing in front of her, strong and confident. Something Haley had never thought Jasmine would ever achieve. Finally, Haley wiped away the tears, took a deep breath, and tried to regain her composure. But she knew that from this moment on, nothing would ever be the same. She had just lost the most important thing she had, her power, and the respect of those around her. And no matter how hard she tried, that truth couldn't be changed. As Haley left the restroom, walking slowly and heavily, she knew the real battle she had to face now wasn't with Jasmine, but with herself, with the deep fears and weaknesses within her. And this time, she wasn't sure if she was strong enough to win. The following days at Summit Ridge unfolded in a completely different atmosphere. It seemed that the incident in the cafeteria between Jasmine and Haley had left a powerful mark on all the students, turning it into the starting point for a significant shift. The once crowded and noisy hallways became quieter, but it wasn't a silence born from fear. It was a silence filled with observation, as if everyone was waiting for something to change. For Jasmine, this feeling was both strange and new. From always having to lower her head to avoid scrutinizing or pitying glances, she began to notice that the looks directed her way had gradually changed. When Jasmine entered the classroom, there were no longer malicious whispers or probing stares. Instead, there were respectful and quietly admiring looks, sincere yet discreet. This made Jasmine feel both unfamiliar and warm. Something had truly changed. Not just for her, but for everyone who had witnessed the event. On the opposite end, Haley, for the first time, clearly felt what it was like to be isolated, something she had once caused for others. She had always been the center of everything at Summit Ridge, surrounded by friends, admired and feared by all. But since her public confrontation with Jasmine, even those who were once her closest friends began to avoid Haley as if she carried an infectious disease. Casual conversations would suddenly stop when she came close, and the fake admiration that once came from others now turned into coldness, even avoidance. Haley tried to appear unaffected, as if it didn't bother her, but deep inside she felt more hurt and confused than ever before. Every time she walked through the halls, no one stepped aside to make way for her like they once did. Instead, Haley had become a ghost, rejected by the very world she had once ruled, lost in a place that used to be her domain of power. Even Haley's closest friends, those who had always stood by her during every act of bullying and mocking, now seemed wary when near her. One afternoon, after school, as Haley tried to approach her group of friends gathered in the courtyard, the looks they gave her were full of discomfort and unease. "What's going on with you guys?" Haley asked, trying to keep her usual confident tone but unable to hide the trembling in her voice. The group was silent for a long moment before Ashley, the one who had always been considered the most loyal to Haley, spoke up hesitantly. "Haley, to be honest, we think you should keep some distance for a while. What happened has made things really complicated." Haley froze. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. She glanced around, but no one in the group dared to meet her gaze anymore. They had chosen the safe path for themselves, leaving Haley to face the consequences of her own actions. The feeling of loss and loneliness had never been so evident. On the other side, Jasmine was gradually being accepted more naturally into new friend groups. Those who had once been hesitant to stand next to her for fear of becoming Haley's next target now approached Jasmine without hesitation, starting small, friendly conversations filled with goodwill. Among them were even those who had once stood by and watched her being bullied but hadn't dared to speak up. Now they approached Jasmine not out of pity, but out of genuine respect for the courage and determination she had shown. One beautiful morning, as Jasmine was organizing her books at her locker, she suddenly heard a soft voice from behind. "Jasmine, are you okay?" She turned around, surprised to find Ashley, Haley's former close friend. Ashley looked at her with a slightly awkward but sincere expression. "I'm sorry for everything that's happened. We were wrong to stay silent like that." Jasmine looked at Ashley, her heart stirred with complex emotions, but in the end she smiled softly and nodded to accept the apology. She understood better than anyone that sometimes the silence of those around you is what hurts the most. "It's okay," Jasmine replied, gently but firmly. "What matters is what we learn from those mistakes." Ashley smiled with relief, nodding sincerely. This moment quickly spread throughout the halls, and Jasmine was increasingly respected not only for her bravery, but also for the forgiveness and maturity she had shown. As for Haley, she sank deeper into isolation and anxiety, created by her own doing. She bitterly realized that the power she once held was never sustainable, because it was built on fear and the false submission of those around her. Now, when no one feared her anymore, Haley was nothing more than a dethroned queen, losing all her power and reputation. She began to feel regret for her actions, but it was too late to undo the damage. Summit Ridge High, once the stage of Haley's dominance, now witnessed a profound change. The power of bullying and oppression had gradually been replaced by genuine respect, coming from courage and sincerity. The students began to realize that they had the power to create a safer and fairer learning environment, as long as they were willing to speak up against injustice. And Jasmine, the girl who had once been seen as weak, now became the symbol of this change, the one who dared to break through the wall of fear and open the door to a brighter future for everyone at Summit Ridge. As the evening drew near, a warm, golden hue settled over Summit Ridge, as if trying to wash away all the tension of the day. Jasmine stepped out of the school gates, feeling the last rays of sunlight gently wrap around her, as though they were comforting and encouraging her after all the challenges she had faced. Marcus Carter was already waiting by the familiar car, his gentle gaze following his daughter as she approached, a look of pride unmistakable in his eyes. As Jasmine sat inside the car, Marcus started the engine and silently drove, the calm atmosphere enveloping them. Jasmine looked out the window, watching the small town fade behind her. At that moment, her heart felt both lightened and filled with a bittersweet sense of nostalgia. She knew very well that today was not just an ordinary day. It marked a moment of growth, a deep transformation within herself. Marcus, who knew his daughter better than anyone, finally broke the gentle silence that had settled between them. His voice came out warm, full of affection, but also clear and serious. "I'm very proud of you, Jasmine." Jasmine looked at her father in surprise, her eyes filled with emotion. Marcus continued, his gaze still focused on the road ahead. "You know, when I decided to intervene at school, I didn't do it because I thought you were weak and needed protection. I did it because I wanted you to realize the inner strength you have, the kind of strength that can only be found in the hardest of times." Jasmine fell silent for a long while, letting her father's words sink in. Finally, she spoke softly, but with determination. "I think I understand now, Dad. I used to think the best way to avoid trouble was to stay quiet and endure. But now I realize that if I stay silent, people like Haley will never stop. They only gain power when we let them." Marcus nodded slowly, a small satisfied smile forming on his lips. "That's right, Jasmine. The power of bullies doesn't come from themselves, but from the silence and fear of those around them. When you decide not to stay silent anymore, when you stand up and face them head on, that power immediately dissolves. That's the real strength I've always hoped you'd find." Jasmine turned her head and looked out the car window. The rows of trees along the road blurred past, but her mind was fully focused on what her father had just said. She remembered the moment she stood up to Haley in the cafeteria, the powerful feeling she had when she boldly confronted her and declared that Haley was the one who was afraid. In that moment, Jasmine had found her true strength, a strength that didn't depend on others, on power or wealth, but only on self-respect and the courage to stand up for herself. Marcus spoke again, as if reading his daughter's thoughts. "Sweetheart, I know you've transferred schools many times, and each time you tried to adjust by staying quiet and enduring. But today, at Summit Ridge, you did what I always knew you could do. You found your voice and dared to protect it. I hope you'll remember this lesson for the rest of your life." Jasmine smiled gently, turning to look at her father with gratitude in her eyes. "I'll never forget, Dad. Today, I truly understood the value of standing up for myself, that no one can trample on me unless I let it happen." Marcus gently squeezed his daughter's hand, as if transferring strength and warmth from his heart to hers. "That's the most important thing, Jasmine. No matter where life takes you, always remember that you never have to bow your head to injustice or fear. When you know your worth, no one can make you feel small or weak again." The car stopped in front of their familiar home. As Jasmine stepped out of the car and gazed at the sunset slowly descending over Summit Ridge, she realized that she was no longer the fragile girl she once was. Jasmine had changed. She had grown stronger, braver, and most importantly, she had learned the value of self-respect. Marcus walked up beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. Together they stood in silence, watching the last light of the day fade behind the distant hills. In that moment, Jasmine knew that she would forever remember the lesson of today, the lesson about self-respect, the value of oneself, and the true power that could only be found when daring to stand up against those who sought to bring her down. In the peaceful quiet of that moment, Jasmine silently promised herself that from this day forward, she would never stay silent in the face of injustice again. And she knew that as long as she continued to be brave, the power of bullies would never be able to hold sway again. Because Jasmine had found her true strength, and she would never lose it again. Thus, Jasmine Carter's story at Summit Ridge High taught us a valuable lesson. True strength comes from self-respect and the courage to speak out against injustice. When Jasmine decided no longer to stay silent, Haley's power vanished instantly. This was the clearest proof that we are always far stronger than we think. What about you? Have you ever faced a similar situation and chosen to stand up for yourself? Share your story in the comments below. If you found this story meaningful, please like, share, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so we can continue spreading positive and humane messages to even more people. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.